We know that our culture a lot of times is not comfortable with anger.
Right.
But it's super important to not suppress anger because, again, it will come out sideways.
Imagine being emotionally and spiritually stronger. What would it look like to know you can be okay when hard things happen? Welcome to the Healing Her podcast. Listen in as best friends Christy and Donna share stories of God's healing work in their lives. Donna is a licensed therapist, and Christy is a veteran communicator in the marketing world. In Season 2, Healing Her Grief, they share their own stories of walking through loss, process the stages of grief, and provide some do's and don'ts to better care for grieving people. So whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or support, Christy and Donna invite you to grab a cup of coffee and join them at the table as we navigate the challenging journey of loss and find hope on the other side.
This is Season 2 of the Healing Her podcast. And we are so excited to be back and sharing information and tools for women to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
That's right. And we want to thank everyone who listened to Season 1, everyone who shared our social media posts, and everyone who shared our podcasts with their friends. It means so much. And we also want to thank you for your feedback about our episodes on our social media and the topics you've recommended we talk about, because that's how we got to this point to focus our second season on healing her grief.
Yes. And in case you're just tuning in, I am sort of an inner healing junkie. My name is Donna Durham, and this is my friend Christy Vandervoort. And I've been on an inner healing journey for over 30 years.
And I have too.
Yes. And so those stories and the work of Christ in our lives is really what has brought us to a point where we want to share the tools that we've used and the information that we have so that other people, other women can also experience that same healing journey.
Mm-hmm. And I think a part of your story, too, is this journey for inner healing has led you to a career.
That's right. That's right. So I went back to school, like 12 years ago. I graduated 10 years ago with my marriage and family therapy degree, and I love walking alongside people as they grow and as they become new creations.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful.
Yes.
So this season, our focus is on healing her grief.
Yes.
And much of the information for this season is taken from the book On Grief and Grieving by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. Right. And so we just look forward for you to hear the messages about the stages of grief.
Yes, yes. Grief is such a universal experience, but I don't think it gets talked about enough. Mm-hmm. We experience grief, of course, when we lose a loved one. We experience grief if we move or change jobs. But we also experience grief when we are trying to get pregnant and our friends are pregnant, right. Or your best friend gets engaged and you hope to be married someday. Mm-hmm. There's all these experiences where people have grief, and a lot of times they feel bad that they feel bad.
Right.
And then that they don't know what it is they're actually walking through.
That is exactly right. I loved a quote from the book from David Kessler, and I want to read it now because it's so good. I don't want to misinterpret anything. But why grieve?
Yeah.
For two reasons, he says. First, those who grieve well live well. And I really love that.
Yes.
And second, and most important, grief is the healing process of the heart, soul, and mind. It is the path that returns us to wholeness. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be a matter of if you will grieve. The question is when you grieve. And until we do, we suffer the effects of that unfinished business.
Yes. So we can experience the unfinished business because grief will come out sideways.
Oh, wow. What does that look like?
So sometimes it's somebody drinking alcohol more than they typically would, or spending money in a way that they wouldn't normally do.
Okay.
Or just numbing out, keeping their minds busy, so they're never alone with their thoughts.
Right.
And so it can literally lead to sort of a life of just not being present with your own heart and your own mind. And so grieving is a really important thing to learn about so that you don't just do these other things.
Right, right. And I want to talk just a little bit about the Kubler-Ross model,
Okay.
the stages of grief, because we're going to go into detail in that, but it's not a linear experience.
That's right.
You want to tell us about that?
Yes. So when we say stages, there's some ways in life that, like when we go to school, you go to kindergarten and then you go to first grade and second grade and third grade.
Right.
When we're talking about stages with grief, it doesn't work that way. It works that some people, and maybe even most people, experience these different stages, not necessarily in the same order, but they do experience a lot of these things. Some will experience all, some will only experience some.
Okay, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
those stages of grief are, and I'll just read them off here.
Sure.
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then another one added by David Kessler was finding meaning.
That's correct. That's correct.
So what does denial look like?
Right. Well, a lot of times when we get the information that we're fired or that we've lost a loved one or we have gotten a diagnosis about a disease, we immediately try to find ways that it isn't true, that
Right.
it's not possible that it's true. And that is what denial looks like. Denial is the stage that initially can help us actually survive the loss.
Oh.
It's actually something that sort of helps our brain pace itself because the information is too overwhelming.
Okay. I did
So-
not know that.
Yes, it's common to wonder in this stage, how could life even go on? It's common to think there must have been a mistake at the lab. There must have been some other, did I even dream this? Did I just make this up? I had a friend who died when I was in my early 20s. And I got the information when I was on vacation. I was coming out of the ocean and my sister-in-law said, "Hey, you need to go call home." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Your friend Heidi has died." And I thought to myself, she shouldn't say things like that.
Oh.
My initial response was, she's wrong and is evil for saying something like that. Like there was absolutely no way that my brain could even take in that information.
I think that's so interesting. The scripture says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yes.
So that means these stages of grief are not foreign to the Lord, obviously, right?
Right, right.
But that he actually made us to process grief like this.
Yes.
So this whole denial thing it's real.
Yes.
And it is a tool
That's right.
to help us survive.
Yes.
So how else does denial try and help us?
Well, again, it's sort of a pacing thing. And some examples of it are, did it really happen? I can't believe he's gone. Did I just dream it? Is it true? I'm going to go home. People will literally make up these ideas like, I'm going to drive home today and she's going to be there. Or this school assembly is actually just a surprise for me. My dad is actually alive. And so these are just some ways that our brains engage in denial.
Wow.
That this person is really gone or this thing has really happened.
There's a story in the book on Grief and Grieving that talks about a woman who was awakened in the middle of the night and received a phone call that her husband has been killed in a car accident in a foreign country. He was away on business. And once she received the news and the conversation was over, she put the phone down and she wondered, did I just dream that?
Right.
So that is a part of the denial process.
Yes, that's right. Once the denial and the shock fades, that's when some more of the healing process can begin. And so the next stage that we'll talk about is actually anger.
Okay. So how does anger play a part in this healing process?
Well, once you start to live in actual reality again, then a lot of times people start experiencing anger. How could this happen to me? How could they leave me? Why would God do this? Why didn't he protect me? And it moves us into this place of anger, of being angry at the situation and not wanting to accept it.
So Donna, how does anger help us?
Well, researchers believe that it actually helps us bind to reality. that it's actually something that makes us feel the present so that we don't dissociate, so we don't live in denial. It helps us bring us out of denial, and it actually helps us move forward in life. There's this beautiful scene in the movie Steel Magnolias.
Oh, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, I know. I love that movie too. And Sally Fields plays Malin. She's the mother of Shelby, and Shelby dies. And after the funeral, Malin, who is typically very calm, cool, collected, she works at the counseling center in town, she really loses it. And she is so angry. And she says, I could run to Texas and back if I wanted to, but Shelby never could.
Yes.
And for the first time we see her, she's not calm, she's not cool, but she's also feeling this anger and just the injustice of losing her daughter in really the prime of her life. But she does this in front of her closest friends.
And I remember in that scene, all of those friends, they stand around and they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do with this anger, this grief.
That's right. Until Clary takes Weezer and says, hit her, just hit her as hard as you can.
That's right. And that brings us to another great line from that movie.
Yes.
Laughter through tears is my favorite emotion.
That's right. We can always thank Dolly Parton for
Yes,
her
ma'am.
words of wisdom there. So we know that our culture a lot of times is not comfortable with anger.
Right.
But it's super important to not suppress anger because, again, it will come out sideways somehow. And so we need to feel those feelings.
And besides death, how else do people experience anger in grief?
I often see anger in divorce.
Right.
If I have a client that has experienced infidelity, it is actually that anger that often will help her move forward and create a new life for herself.
Really?
Yes, because without anger, we often get stuck. We can often move to a place where we don't want to move forward. We don't want to live. We can't imagine a life without this person. And so anger actually does help us visualize a new life.
Wow.
Yeah.
I never imagined that anger could play such an important part in moving us forward in this healing journey.
Yes, it's actually a strength, and some researchers say it's almost like a bridge back to reality because it's so common for us to dissociate when we experience grief. And so it helps us be more in touch with our bodies, it helps us be more in touch with the story, and it helps us be more in touch with our future.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's important to think of anger as a strength that binds us to reality.
Wow. I think in our day and age, when you think of anger, you don't think of it as a strength necessarily.
Yeah. A lot of times I like to talk about anger. The example I use is Rosa Parks in the civil rights movement, how she was she was in an unjust system. And she had paid her money to be on the bus. She was sitting on the part of the bus that she was supposed to be sitting on. But she decided she would not give up her seat. And that was because she had a righteous anger, an anger that said, this is not okay. And she and her other community members got off the bus system and helped each other get to work and said, we will not be part of this unjust system. So anger and grief is something that keeps us connected to reality and helps us move forward.
That's actually very beautiful.
Yeah. So another stage that we experience is called bargaining. And maybe you've heard people be like, well, what if we had gone to the doctor sooner? What if I had encouraged this person to do this? And that is really that bargaining piece of what if?
Right. I remember, over a year ago now, my dad passed away.
Yes.
He had COVID. It was a 9-day process to watch him leave this earth and enter heaven. And I know afterwards my mom said to me, I wonder if we'd gotten that last COVID shot.
Yeah.
And it was hard to see her thinking that she had some responsibility in this when I really believe it was my dad's time to go.
Yeah. And what I hear in that is something that often comes up with bargaining is this sense of guilt. Did I do something that contributed to this? Could I have prevented this from happening?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these stages are really just trying to keep your mind off the pain.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so we go down this whole list of research. What if I had that
Right.
other COVID shot? Or what if this doctor had administered this? Or what if I had done X, Y, or Z? And focus on what didn't happen
Right.
instead of the reality of what has happened now.
Right. I remember a story in the book. There's a gentleman that wanted to go for a walk.
Yeah.
He wanted to stay healthy and wanted his wife to stay healthy so they could do the fun things that they wanted to do in retirement.
Yeah.
And she didn't want to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And he finally convinced her to do that. And then 10 minutes into the walk, there was a car accident and his wife was tragically killed.
Oh, can you imagine?
I cannot imagine that guilt that would
Yes.
play into that.
Yeah.
And that what if I had just said, okay, let's stay home.
Right. And those things, like he can stay in that forever. What if, instead of coming to that place of now what does my life look like without her?
Oh,
Yeah. Which leads us to depression. And I really do think a lot of these stages are trying to keep us away from this pain. So depression can be a reaction to the reality that we're now facing.
okay.
It can be the, I don't want to do this. And so it can make you feel like staying in bed. It can make you feel like isolating. It makes you feel like not talking to anyone.
Right.
There's this fantastic scene in the BBC show called The Midwife.
Yes.
I think it's in season 3, episode 4. And spoiler alert, Jenny's fiance dies.
Yes.
And they do this really good job of this montage where they have her, she's just sitting on a bed staring into space. And then she's sitting at the end of the bed staring into space. And then she's sitting on the other side of the bed staring into space. Because a lot of times in depression and grief, we might just sit and stare. And that's literally part of the healing process.
Yes.
I remember when I moved from Orange City to Nashville.
That's one of my grief stories. When your best friend moves away.
Yes. It was so hard. We had lived in Iowa for 10 years and then moved to back to Nashville 13 years ago. But there were times when I would get the kids off to school and I would literally like curl up with my dogs in our beanbag and I would just be sad.
Yeah.
And I didn't know then that it's literally just part of the grief process. But I can look back now and go, oh, that's exactly what I was doing. And it was really hard.
And that grief helps you prepare you for more grief.
That's right. So, I lost a business 5 years ago, and I spent a lot of time laying on the couch, thinking and crying and journaling and praying and all of those things. But I actually did know that I would recover. Because I had been through grief before,
Right.
I knew that there was going to be another side.
Right.
And I was really grateful for that. But I also just had to hold space for my own self to
Right.
kind of wait it out and move through it.
Right. So, we're talking about a person who is in grief and now experiencing depression, but what can you do as a friend or a spouse? How can you walk alongside someone who's in this stage of grief?
Yeah, I think some of it is just to say, I think this is really normal. I know that this is not anything that you would like to be living out right now, but I want you to know I'm here for you. If I can come over, if I can bring you a meal, if I can do anything for you,
Right.
clean your bathroom.
Right.
It's like that's how you can be with somebody in grief. Telling somebody you should be doing this differently, or you should be moving on, or your loved one would never want you to act this way. Those things are not helpful.
Okay.
And of course, we're going to do a whole episode
Right.
on the do's and don'ts. But literally just letting your presence be known and letting people know that you love them and that this is normal and that you're going to move through it.
Right. And when you did lose Waiting Comforts,
Yes.
I got a call
Yeah.
from you and said I need to come to Iowa.
Yeah, that's right. I just wanted to be with you.
And it was, I felt like it was a privilege to have you come and we just sit on the couch
That's right.
and
Right.
not necessarily even talk about anything.
Yeah.
But I think we did do some reminiscing about our life together in Orange City.
Yeah.
But just to share meals and be in the same location,
Yeah.
it helped me
Yes.
as well
Yeah.
process your grief.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think friends or spouses go through a process of their own grief
Yes.
when their person is grieving.
That's right. And you had witnessed the whole rise and the fall of it.
Right.
And so that's another part of that. Even going back to that Steel Magnolias episode or that movie, that scene where all of her friends had walked through
Right.
Shelby getting married, the sickness, having a baby, all of those things.
Right.
And so that's really, I think, what I also found in you is like you had witnessed the whole thing.
Right.
And our most important thing that we have in every culture of the world is a sense of connection and belonging. And so that is a real comfort when we're going through grief.
So the final stage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief is acceptance.
That's right. And so acceptance is, it moves us to a place of, this is my life now,
Oh, yeah.
and I can be okay.
Wow.
I did lose that job, and I can build another career. My spouse is gone. I can survive this, and I can be okay. There's one of the ways I like to talk about grief is how the waves of the ocean.
Yes.
So in the ocean, you may go out to the beach one day and it's completely tumultuous and there's lots of crashing waves and it looks so stormy. And we really associate that a lot of times with maybe even the beginning of grief.
Okay.
Some days you go out to the beach and the water is so
Right.
calm.
Right.
And other days you go out and the water is calm, but boom, here comes a big wave.
Right.
And so that's just a description of what you might experience with grief.
Right.
And so with acceptance, we're kind of hoping that people are seeing more good days than bad days. You're still going to have bad days, but more good days than bad days, that your emotions are a little more calm and you're not having these giant
Sure,
waves. Now,
sure.
even for years to come, you can out of nowhere get a wave of grief for sure. But part of acceptance is that I'm feeling calmer now. I can see a future ahead of me.
Sure. My mom just went to, I think, her first funeral since my dad died.
Wow.
I know. And she called me right after she got home.
Okay.
And she cried a little bit and she said, I didn't realize it was going to be so hard.
Yeah.
Because she was doing so well.
Yes.
In her mind, you know, she
Yeah.
has accepted, moved through these stages
Yeah.
and accepted that he's gone. But there was a song at the end of the funeral that was, I'll always love you.
Oh.
And she had said that to my dad right before he died.
Yeah.
She said, Charles, I'll always love you. And
Yeah.
it's okay to go home to Jesus.
Yes. Yes.
So that wave came up again and
Yeah.
she had to go through that.
Yes. And that's just normal. Of course. They were married for how many years? 60?
60 at least.
Yes. And so, of course, that after being married for 60 years and he's been gone for one, there's going to be these moments. And she has grieved well. She
Yes.
did grief share group and she did some other things, but it just hurts, you know, when we're reminded of our loved one. So in this stage, you may feel like the fog is lifting. It may feel like you want to engage with friends again. It may feel like you may develop new friendships, or you're ready to look for another job, or, you know, you just feeling more energy
Sure.
and things like that. There's a really great through line in the movie Forrest Gump,
Okay.
where we know that Forrest Gump has saved Lieutenant Dan's life in Vietnam, but he lost his legs. And so we see these scenes where Lieutenant Dan is screaming at God in a storm. You call this a storm? He's making fun of Forrest Gump because he believes in Jesus and other people he knows believes in Jesus. But we also see the scene where Lieutenant Dan says to Forrest, I don't think I ever have thanked you for saving my life. And then he hops into the ocean and he has a beautiful swim on a beautiful morning in a really calm sea. And it's just a fantastic picture of the rage of grief that leads way to the acceptance of this is my life now.
Isn't that interesting that there are so many movies that hold grief and
Yes.
give us language for grief
Absolutely.
and share the journey of grief with
Yes.
us? Even, I mean, you would never say that Forrest Gump was a journey through grief.
Right.
But that's a beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful word picture for us.
Yes, it is. So the final stage of grief, and David Kessler added this to the work that he and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had done, is making meaning.
Okay.
And it has a lot to do with the story that we tell ourselves. He shares a story in his book, Making Meaning, about a friend that saw him after he lost his son and after he broke his arm. And he said, you're always wounded, first emotionally and then physically.
Right.
But I love David's response. He says to him, no, I'm always healing.
Yes.
And I just love the reframe of that.
Yes.
And so instead of this horrible death happened to me, death happens. Instead of I'm a victim, I'm a survivor.
Right.
Instead of my boss hated me, corporations have layoffs sometimes. These things just, they happen and they are part of life. So making meaning is also really personal. So every person may have sort of a different meaning. Lisa Kudrow from the show Friends
Yes.
has this great story. She was a commencement speaker, and you can find this on the internet. But she actually traces how being fired from this show and this show and this show paved the path for her to have the most successful acting experience of her career.
Right.
A 10-year series
Yes.
in one of the most popular shows probably ever.
Right.
And I love her reframe
Yes.
of that.
That is so good.
Um,
And don't you have a story about your dad?
Yes, yes. So my dad has been gone for over 20 years. But we cleaned out the house, I think about 7 years ago. Well, he had done an enormous amount of genealogy research. I mean, literally, he started in like 1975, and he did that really through the 80s. So when we were cleaning out the house, I had boxes and boxes of genealogy research. And in several of the letters that he had written to other people, because my dad kept complete correspondence. If he wrote a letter, he would keep a copy of what he wrote so that when people responded,
That's
he would
amazing.
pair those things together. And in these letters, he would write, I want my children and my grandchildren to know who their family was.
Right.
And that piece had never been completed. And so I compiled it and I sent a binder to all of my siblings and all of my dad's grandchildren
Right.
so that his wish would be complete. And it made me feel closer to him, and it just helped me make meaning of his life and of my life. And I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity to do
That
it.
is beautiful.
I sent those out so that so that everybody got it on my parents' 60th wedding anniversary.
Oh, Donna.
Yeah.
That's so special.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And how neat that you can take something that happened that you didn't even know about, really.
Yeah.
You just discovered it when you were cleaning out the house.
Yeah.
To take that and invest so much time in it and make it a part of your story now.
Yes.
That's so neat.
Yes. And like I said, it's personal. So it may be, if somebody in your life that you lost loved missions. And so you decide, okay, I'm going to donate to a mission that they really loved. Or if you had somebody in your life that was a big tipper and you
Right.
go out to eat on the anniversary of their passing or on their birthday and you leave the server, a big tip or whatever. And you do these things just to honor the person and honor what they meant to you.
Right. I know with my dad,
Yeah.
When we go out for ice cream, it's always going to be something where we know Dad would have loved this.
Yes. Yeah. So we just want to thank you guys for tuning in to our first episode of season 2. And as we wrap up, we just invite you to reflect on your own grief. We invite you to consider look back and go, oh, maybe I was experiencing grief in this way or that way. And if this has been meaningful to you, we just invite you to share on your social media. We invite you to engage with us on social media. What questions do you have? What stories would you like to share?
Absolutely.
And in the episodes to come, we're going to talk about symptoms of grief. We're going to talk about planning and preparing for grief. I'm going to share my own story of the grief of growing up with a mom that's mentally ill.
Right.
So we hope that you'll keep listening, and we hope that this is really meaningful work for you.
We hope today's conversation brought you comfort and insight on your journey toward healing. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe and share with a friend who might benefit. Remember, you can follow along on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Pella TV. We want to thank Side by Side Ministries and Adri and Marla Gruneweg for their financial support. This podcast was created by Donna Durham and Christy Vandervoort. It was produced and recorded by Monty Godike.